Have you ever lost the person who meant everything to you when you were just a child? On December 1st, 1963, 5-year-old Madonna Louise Ciccone watched her mother take her final breath, and that moment would shape every decision, every song, and every controversy for the rest of her life. What happened next turned a broken little girl into the most powerful woman in music history. It was a cold December morning in Rochester Hills, Michigan. Madonna Fortin Ciccone, just 30 years old, had been fighting breast cancer for over a year. Her daughter, little Madonna Louise, didn't understand why Mommy had been getting thinner, why she spent so many days in bed, or why Daddy's eyes were always red from crying. The woman who would one day become the queen of pop was about to lose her queen, her mother, her protector, her first example of strength and beauty. What she didn't know was that this devastating loss would become the driving force behind her relentless pursuit of love, attention, and immortality. Madonna Fortin was everything a little girl could dream of in a mother. She was beautiful, with dark hair and kind eyes that lit up whenever she looked at her children. She had married Tony Ciccone, a young Italian-American engineer, and together they were building what seemed like a perfect Catholic family in suburban Michigan. Madonna Louise was the third of 6 children, but she had always felt a special connection to her mother. Maybe it was because they shared the same name, or maybe it was because, even at 5 years old, Madonna Louise had her mother's fierce determination and stubborn streak. "Mommy and I are the same," little Madonna would tell anyone who would listen. "We're both strong." Madonna Fortin would spend hours with her daughter, teaching her to be independent and fearless. She would brush her daughter's hair while telling her stories about how women could be anything they wanted to be. She encouraged Madonna Louise to speak up, to take charge, to never let anyone make her feel small. "You are special, Madonna Louise," she would whisper during their bedtime routine. "Promise me you'll always remember how special you are." But by 1962, something was wrong. Madonna Fortin had discovered a lump in her breast, and despite her youth and apparent health, the diagnosis was devastating: breast cancer, already advanced. The year 1963 was supposed to be a happy time for the Ciccone family. Tony was doing well at his engineering job, and they had recently moved to a larger house in Rochester Hills. The children were thriving, and Madonna Louise was showing signs of the charismatic personality that would one day captivate the world.
But as her mother's condition worsened, Madonna Louise began to change too. The carefree little girl who loved to dance around the house and perform for her family became quiet and watchful. She seemed to sense that something terrible was happening, even though the adults tried to protect her from the truth. Madonna Fortin was determined to fight. She underwent radical mastectomy surgery, a brutal procedure in 1963 that offered little hope but represented the best medical science could provide. She endured primitive chemotherapy treatments that left her weak and nauseated. But most heartbreaking of all, she tried to maintain normalcy for her children while her body was betraying her. Madonna Louise would often find her mother sitting by the window, staring out at nothing, her hand pressed to her chest where the surgery had left its mark. Even at 5 years old, Madonna Louise understood that her mother was slipping away. "Mommy, are you going to heaven?" she asked one November afternoon, climbing into her mother's lap with the directness that would become her trademark. Madonna Fortin looked into her daughter's eyes, those same determined eyes she saw in the mirror, and made a decision that would haunt both of them. Instead of lying or offering false comfort, she told her daughter the truth. "Yes, sweetheart, but even when I'm in heaven, I'll always be with you. You'll carry me in your heart forever. December 1st, 1963, started like any other day, except it didn't. Madonna Louise woke up sensing something different in the house. There was a heaviness in the air, a quiet desperation among the adults that even a child could feel. Her mother had been bedridden for weeks, too weak to get up, too sick to eat. The cancer had spread throughout her body, and the doctors had quietly told Tony Ciccone that the end was near. Madonna Louise spent that last day doing what she had been doing for months, trying to take care of her mother. She brought her water. She showed her drawings from school. She sang the little songs they used to sing together. But her mother's responses were getting weaker, her smiles more distant. As evening approached, Madonna 14 called her daughter to her bedside, one final time. "Madonna Louise," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need you to promise me something." The little girl leaned in close, holding her mother's frail hand. "Promise me you'll take care of everyone. Promise me you'll be strong. And promise me you'll never let anyone tell you that you can't do something because you're a girl." "I promise, Mommy," Madonna Louise whispered back, not fully understanding the weight of what she was agreeing to. Those were the last words they shared. Madonna 14 closed her eyes and never opened them again. At 7:30 p.m. on December 1st, 1963, Madonna Louise Ciccone lost her mother, her protector, and her childhood, all in one devastating moment. The death of Madonna 14 shattered the Ciccone household. Tony Ciccone, overwhelmed with grief and suddenly responsible for 6 young children, struggled to hold everything together. The older children tried to help, but they were dealing with their own devastating loss. Madonna Louise, however, reacted differently than anyone expected. Instead of retreating into sadness, she became fiercely determined to fill the void her mother had left behind. At just 5 years old, she appointed herself as the family's new caretaker. She would wake up early to help get her younger siblings ready for school. She would attempt to cook meals, often with disastrous results. She would comfort her brothers and sisters when they cried, even though she was just as heartbroken as they were. Madonna became like a little adult overnight, her father later recalled. She was 5 years old, but she was trying to run the whole household. But the most profound change in Madonna Louise was invisible to anyone else. The loss of her mother had created a deep, aching void in her heart that she became determined to fill. She began seeking attention and validation in ways that concerned the adults around her. She would perform constantly, singing, dancing, putting on little shows for anyone who would watch. She became the loudest voice in every room, the child who always had to be the center of attention. It was as if she believed that if she could just get enough people to notice her, to love her, maybe the pain of losing her mother would finally go away. 2 years after Madonna 14's death, Tony Ciccone married Joan Gustafson, the family's housekeeper who had been helping care for the children since their mother's illness. For the other Ciccone children, Joan represented stability and care during an impossible time. But for Madonna Louise, Joan represented the ultimate betrayal. "She's not my mother," 7-year-old Madonna Louise declared on the day her father announced his engagement. "My mother is dead, and no one can take her place." The relationship between Madonna Louise and her stepmother was complicated and often hostile. Joan was a kind woman who genuinely wanted to care for the children, but Madonna Louise saw her as an intruder trying to replace the irreplaceable. This early experience of feeling replaced and forgotten would fuel Madonna's later obsession with being unforgettable, with making sure that once people knew her, they could never ignore her again. Madonna Louise began acting out in school, challenging authority figures and refusing to follow rules that didn't make sense to her. Teachers complained that she was disruptive and attention-seeking, but what they didn't understand was that she was a little girl trying to process the most devastating loss imaginable. As Madonna Louise grew older, Her mother's death continued to shape every aspect of her personality and her choices. The little girl who had lost the most important love of her life became obsessed with being loved, but also terrified of depending on that love. She excelled in school, not just because she was intelligent, but because academic success brought her the attention and praise she craved. She threw herself into dance and theater, not just as hobbies, but as escape routes. Every performance was preparation for the day she would leave Rochester Hills behind and find a place where her talent and determination would be enough to fill the void her mother's death had created. "I learned very early that I had to rely on myself," Madonna would later explain. "When you lose your mother that young, you realize that nothing is guaranteed. You can't count on other people to take care of you." This realization would drive her to become one of the most self-reliant artists in music history, maintaining control over every aspect of her career and refusing to let anyone else make decisions about her life. By the time Madonna Louise was a teenager, she had developed a clear understanding of what she needed to do. She needed to get out of Michigan, away from the memories and the pain, and create a life so extraordinary that it would somehow make sense of all the loss she had experienced. She threw herself into dance and theater not just as hobbies, but as escape routes. Every performance was preparation for the day she would leave Rochester Hills behind and find a place where her talent and determination would be enough to fill the void her mother's death had created.
Her family didn't understand her ambition. They saw it as selfishness, as abandonment. But Madonna Louise saw it as survival. She had made a promise to her dying mother to be strong, to never let anyone tell her she couldn't do something because she was a girl. Staying in Michigan felt like breaking that promise. At 17, she won a dance scholarship to the University of Michigan, but even that wasn't enough. After 2 years, she made the decision that would change everything. She was going to New York City with nothing but $35 in her pocket and an unshakable belief that she was destined for something extraordinary. Madonna's entire career can be understood as a response to her mother's death. Every song, every reinvention, every controversy was driven by a deep need to become immortal, to ensure that, unlike her mother, she would never be forgotten. The little girl who had watched her mother disappear became a woman obsessed with leaving a permanent mark on the world. She didn't just want to be famous, she wanted to be unforgettable. She didn't just want to be successful, she wanted to be eternal. Her music was filled with themes of loss, abandonment, and the search for love. Songs like Mother and Father, Promise to Try, and Little Star directly addressed the trauma of losing her mother and the impact it had on her ability to form relationships. But perhaps more significantly, Madonna's relentless reinvention, her refusal to be pinned down or categorized, was her way of ensuring that she could never be lost or forgotten the way her mother had been. Throughout her life, Madonna's relationships followed a pattern that could be traced back to that December day in 1963. She would throw herself completely into relationships, seeking the unconditional love she had lost as a child. But she would also maintain a part of herself that remained untouchable, protected from the possibility of experiencing that devastating loss again. Her marriages to Sean Penn and Guy Ritchie, her relationships with Warren Beatty, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Carlos Leon, all of them were marked by her desperate need for love and her equally powerful fear of vulnerability. "I think I've spent my whole life trying to find my mother," Madonna admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability during a 2005 interview, "and also trying to make sure I never need anyone the way I needed her."
Madonna's later exploration of Kabbalah, her adoption of children from Malawi, her charitable work, all of it can be understood as a continuation of her search for the spiritual connection she lost when her mother died.
The little girl who had been promised that her mother would always be with her had spent decades looking for evidence of that presence. In Kabbalah, she found a spiritual framework that promised eternal connection and divine love. In her adopted children, she found a way to provide the motherly love she had been denied. But most importantly, in her philanthropic work, she found a way to honor her mother's memory by becoming the kind of mother figure to other children that she had lost so early. Today, Madonna is 65 years old and has achieved everything she dreamed of as a heartbroken little girl in Michigan. She is one of the most successful artists in history. She has maintained relevance across multiple decades, and she has indeed become immortal in the way she always intended. But the most profound legacy of that December day in 1963 isn't Madonna's fame or fortune. It's the example she set for millions of people around the world who have experienced devastating loss and wondered how to survive it. Madonna's story shows us that our greatest traumas can become our greatest sources of strength. The little girl who lost everything at 5 years old grew up to become a woman who refused to let anything or anyone limit her potential. She kept every promise she made to her dying mother. She became strong. She took care of others. And she never let anyone tell her that she couldn't do something because she was a girl. Madonna's mother died on December 1st, 1963. But in a very real way, Madonna Fortin has never left her daughter's side. Every time Madonna steps onto a stage, she carries her mother with her. Every time she fights for artistic freedom, she honors her mother's memory. Every time she refuses to be diminished or dismissed, she proves that love doesn't end with death. The little girl who lost her mother at 5 years old grew up to become the woman who would never be lost or forgotten. And in doing so, she ensured that her mother's love, her mother's strength, and her mother's spirit would be immortal too. Madonna Louise Ciccone lost her mother on a cold December day in 1963. But that loss didn't break her. It forged her into one of the strongest, most determined, and most influential women of her generation. Sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest power. And sometimes the people we lose never really leave us at all. If this story of turning devastating loss into unstoppable strength moved you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for more stories about how life's greatest challenges can become our greatest gifts. Share this with someone who needs to know that it's possible to transform pain into purpose. And let us know in the comments, how has loss shaped your life? What promises have you made to honor the memory of someone you've loved? Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is keep living, keep fighting, and keep loving. Not in spite of our loss, but because of it.